1968, Pittsburgh. The story of a woman who spent 15 years preparing the perfect revenge. 3 men remained alive but ceased to be human. Official cause, medical complication. Real cause, absolutely precise calculation. August 22, 1968, Thursday evening shift at the Westinghouse manufacturing plant in Pittsburgh. Victor Hartley was climbing the metal staircase to shop floor 3 when someone called out behind him. He was 22 years old, a solid guy with an honest face and working hands, calloused from operating the lathe. He turned around. 3 men stood on the landing: shift supervisor Clayton Mercer, operations manager Dale Hutchins, and senior foreman Warren Caldwell. All 3 were company men, respected veterans with decades of service. Victor immediately sensed something wrong from their faces. "Hartley, we need to talk," said Mercer, a 40-year-old man with a heavy, square face. His voice was calm, too calm. "I heard you filed a complaint with the union about safety violations?" Victor nodded. 3 days ago, he'd filed an official grievance. The ventilation system on their floor wasn't working. People were breathing metal dust. Many were developing lung problems. He'd collected signatures from 12 workers. He thought he was doing the right thing. "Here's the thing, kid." Hutchins lit a cigarette. "These things get handled differently. You come to your supervisor first. Talk it out man to man. You don't go running to the union making the whole department look bad." "I did come to you 2 months ago. You said, tough it out, no budget for repairs." Caldwell, the oldest of the 3, a 50-year-old gray-haired man with a 30 years service pin on his lapel, sighed heavily. "Victor, you're young, you're hot-headed, I get it. But you created a problem. Tomorrow we've got an inspector coming from OSHA because of your complaint. You understand what that means? No bonuses, written warnings, maybe worse. I didn't want to get anyone in trouble. I just wanted the ventilation fixed. Too late now. Now we need to fix this." Mercer stepped closer. "Tomorrow you're going to the union office and you're withdrawing that complaint. You'll say you made a mistake, that the ventilation's fine. Got it?" Victor looked at all 3 of them. He saw how tense their faces were, how Mercer's fists were clenched. He understood that if he agreed, he'd be despised by the workers, those 12 men who'd signed. He understood that if he refused, things would go badly. But he couldn't agree. "No," he said quietly. "I'm not withdrawing it. People are getting sick." Mercer hit first. His fist slammed into Victor's stomach, doubling him over. Then a punch to the face from Hutchins. Victor fell onto the metal grating of the landing. He tried to defend himself, but there were 3 of them. They hit methodically, professionally, knew where to hit to avoid obvious marks. Ribs, kidneys, legs. They hit for a long time. Then Caldwell, who until then had only been holding his arm, said, "Enough. That's enough." Mercer stopped, breathing heavily. Victor lay on the landing, coughing blood. He couldn't move. Pain was everywhere. "Remember this, kid." Caldwell leaned over him. "You fell down the stairs. By yourself. Slipped. Everyone saw it. Understand?" Victor tried to say something, but only blood came from his mouth. Mercer kicked him one last time in the back. Victor felt something crack inside, a blinding flash of pain, and lost consciousness. They found him 20 minutes later, called an ambulance. At the hospital, doctors shook their heads. Severe spinal trauma, multiple fractures, internal bleeding. Poor prognosis. Grace Hartley received the call at the textile mill dormitory where she worked as a weaver. She was 19 years old, Victor's younger sister, his only family. Their parents had died 3 years earlier. She rushed to the hospital by morning. Victor lay in intensive care, unconscious. The doctor, a middle-aged woman with a tired face, told her the truth. "He'll survive, but he'll be paralyzed from the waist down. The spine is damaged. Permanently. Grace stood in the corridor holding onto the wall. She didn't cry. She was one of those people who don't cry in public. She asked, "How did it happen?" "Fell down the stairs at the plant," the doctor answered. "That's what the paperwork says." Victor was never careless. The doctor looked at her with a long gaze. "I know, but that's what the paperwork says." Grace understood everything. She went to the plant, to the gate, asked the workers what happened. At first, they were silent. Then an old man, an elderly machinist, pulled her aside. "Girl, don't go there. 3 supervisors beat him up for filing that union complaint. Everyone saw it, but everyone's keeping quiet. Company men, nothing will happen to them, but it will to you if you make noise. Forgive your brother and move on with your life." Grace learned their names: Clayton Mercer, Dale Hutchins, Warren Caldwell. She went to the police, filed a report. The detective, a young cop with an indifferent face, listened and said, "Any witnesses?" "No." "Any evidence?" "No." "Statement from the victim?" "He's unconscious." "Statements from the supervisors?" "Yes. All 3 claim Hartley fell by himself, tripped. Case closed." "But they beat him." "Prove it." She couldn't prove it. She was nobody. A 19-year-old textile worker with no education, no connections, no money. They were everything. Company men, respected with awards and seniority. The American system was supposed to be fair. In practice, it protected its own. Grace sat all night by her brother's bedside. When he regained consciousness in the morning, the first thing he asked was, "Will I walk again?" She couldn't lie to him. She shook her head. Victor closed his eyes. A tear rolled down his temple. He was a young man. He had a girlfriend, Linda. They were planning to get married in 6 months. Now it was all over. He'd remained disabled at 22. "Grace," he whispered, "don't do anything stupid. Don't mess with them. They're dangerous." "I won't," she lied. But that night, when she returned to the dormitory, she made herself a vow. She swore to get revenge on all 3. But she understood. Right now, it was impossible. She was too weak, too invisible. They'd kill her or break her, and no one would even know. Now she needed to wait. She needed to become strong. She needed to become necessary. Grace enrolled in nursing school, not out of love for medicine, out of cold calculation. She knew medical professionals have power over life, quiet, invisible, but absolute power. Pittsburgh School of Nursing accepted her in September 1968. She passed the entrance exams with flying colors. She'd always been capable, just never had the opportunity to study before. 3 years, she devoured textbooks, memorized anatomy, physiology, pharmacology. Days were classes, evenings were working as a hospital aide, nights were shifts watching over her brother. Victor was discharged after 2 months, given permanent disability status. His girlfriend Linda came once, cried, and never appeared again. Victor wasn't angry with her. He wasn't angry at all, really. He seemed to have gone out inside. He lay in their 2-bedroom apartment on Liberty Avenue, stared at the ceiling, read books. Grace came to him every day after school, fed him, bathed him, changed his bedding. He tried to refuse. "Grace, you have your own life. Don't waste it on me." "You are my life," she answered. And it was true, but not the whole truth. The whole truth was that every time, looking at his paralyzed legs, at his emptied face, she remembered 3 names: Mercer, Hutchins, Caldwell, and the vow became harder. In 1971, she finished nursing school, got her RN license. She was assigned to Pittsburgh General Hospital, surgical ward. She worked conscientiously, was neat, efficient, invisible. Doctors praised her. The head nurse said, "Hartley is gold, not a nurse. If only they were all like her." Grace nodded silently and memorized. Memorized how anesthesia was done. Memorized dosages, reactions, complications. The surgical ward was a good school. They operated constantly. She saw dozens of anesthesia procedures, hundreds of drugs. She remembered everything. But nurses don't give anesthesia. That's done by anesthesiologists, which meant she needed to become a doctor. In 1977, at age 28, Grace enrolled in medical school at the University of Pittsburgh. By then, she'd already worked 6 years in surgery, had recommendations, experience. They accepted her without entrance exams based on her record. 5 years of medical school. Days were lectures, evenings were hospital shifts, nights were her brother. By then, Victor had learned to sit in a wheelchair, could partially care for himself. He worked from home, translating technical documentation from German. He'd learned the language in his youth. It gave his life at least some meaning. "Grace," he said to her once, "you're ruining your life. You're 30, you're not married, you're disappearing between me and your studies. This isn't right." "Everything's fine," she answered. "This is what I want." "No. You're taking revenge. I see it. You're preparing for something. I'm not stupid, Grace. I see how you stare into space when you think I'm not looking. You're still thinking about them." She said nothing. He took her hand. "Grace, let it go. God will judge them. You just live." "I am living," she said. And it was true. She was living. Her life just had a purpose she'd been working toward for 9 years. In 1982, Grace Hartley graduated from medical school with honors, specializing in anesthesiology. She was 33 years old. She was hired at Allegheny General Hospital in the ICU, the most prestigious hospital in Pittsburgh. All complex cases came here, all the important people. Grace became an anesthesiologist. Now she could administer anesthesia. Now she could begin. 14 years had passed since that August day. The 3 supervisors had aged, grown bellies and awards. They didn't even remember the young worker they'd once beaten, but he remembered them every day. And his sister did too. In 1982, Clayton Mercer was 54 years old. He hadn't worked as a supervisor for years. He'd risen to plant manager, then to operations director. A large man with a red face and gray hair, member of the Rotary Club, volunteer firefighter, city council member. Lived in a nice 4-bedroom house in Squirrel Hill, raising 3 kids. The oldest had already become an engineer himself. Successful American career, exemplary biography. Dale Hutchins, 52 years old, still shift supervisor at that same shop floor. Not as successful as Mercer, but still solidly on his feet. Own house in the suburbs, Buick sedan, summer cabin. Wife worked for a local politician. Connections, respect, stability. Warren Caldwell, 64 years old, the oldest. He was already retired, decorated worker, union veteran, gray, bent, but still solid. Lived with his wife in an old apartment on Liberty Avenue, not far from where Victor Hartley now lived in his wheelchair. They occasionally met, these 3, at plant reunions, veteran gatherings, drank beer, remembered their youth. Sometimes one of them would vaguely recall, "Remember that kid, Hartley, I think, who went crying to the union? How'd that end?" "Oh, fell down the stairs, ended up crippled. Dumb kid, hot-headed, too young." And they'd move on to other topics. They felt no remorse. In their worldview, they'd done the right thing, protected the operation, punished a troublemaker, taught a lesson. Such things were done constantly. It was normal for that time. Young idealist got a reality check, harsh but fair. They forgot about him within a month. Grace didn't forget for a single day. On February 1, 1983, Clayton Mercer felt sharp pain in his right side. His wife called an ambulance. In the emergency room at Allegheny General, the on-call surgeon examined him, palpated his abdomen, did an ultrasound. Diagnosis? Acute cholecystitis, emergency surgery required. A stone had blocked the bile duct, inflammation was starting, could develop into peritonitis. They needed to operate. Mercer was an important man. They put him not in a general ward, but in a private room. They assigned him the best surgeon and the best anesthesiologist, Grace Hartley. When she entered the room for the pre-op assessment, he didn't even look up at her. Lay in bed reading the Wall Street Journal, wincing from pain. She introduced herself. "Mr. Mercer, I'm Dr. Hartley, the anesthesiologist. I need to ask you a few questions before surgery." He grunted something, not looking up from the paper. She methodically questioned him. Any drug allergies, what chronic conditions, previous surgeries, how he tolerated anesthesia before. He answered reluctantly, irritably. Important man being bothered with trivia. Grace wrote everything in the chart. Her face was absolutely calm, professional. She looked at this man, aged, fattened, accustomed to respect and fear from others. In 2 hours, his life would be in her hands, literally. One movement of a finger on the syringe, one extra dose of medication, and he'd be gone. But she wasn't planning to kill him. That would be too simple, too quick. She'd promised herself something different. "That all?" Mercer grunted. "That's all, Mr. Mercer. Surgery is tomorrow morning. Don't worry. Everything will go fine." She left the room. In the staff room, she pulled out Mercer's chart, carefully studied all the data. Age 54, weight 215 pounds, height 5 feet 10 inches. Blood pressure elevated, 150/95. Mild form of ischemic heart disease, takes nitroglycerin as needed. Liver enlarged, likes to drink. Smokes. Typical American executive in pre-retirement age. Grace opened her anesthesiology reference book. She'd read it so many times she almost knew it by heart. Found the needed chapter. Complications of general anesthesia. Cerebral hypoxia. Hypoxia, oxygen deprivation. The brain is very sensitive to lack of oxygen. If the brain doesn't receive oxygen for 4 to 6 minutes, irreversible changes begin. Neurons die. If the brain doesn't receive oxygen for 8 to 10 minutes, the person falls into a vegetative state. Heart works, lungs breathe, but there's no consciousness and never will be again. Living corpse. During surgery, the anesthesiologist controls the patient's breathing. The patient sleeps under anesthesia. Their breathing is taken over by a ventilator machine. The machine supplies a mixture of oxygen and anesthetic to the lungs. The anesthesiologist monitors the indicators: pulse, pressure, blood oxygen saturation. Everything should be normal. But what if the anesthesiologist, for a few minutes, doesn't notice that oxygen delivery is disrupted? What if the ventilator is working, but there's too little oxygen in the mixture? The patient is under deep anesthesia, feels nothing. The surgeon is cutting the abdomen, busy with his work. Monitors show the heart beating. Meanwhile, the brain is slowly dying from hypoxia. When surgery ends, they'll try to wake the patient, administer anesthesia reversal agents, stimulants. But he won't wake up, because there's nothing left to wake up. The brain is dead. Official cause? Individual intolerance to anesthesia, complication despite all measures taken. It was perfect. Impossible to prove. Looked like an accident, like medical error, like tragic circumstances. Grace closed the reference book. Her hands didn't tremble. She was absolutely calm. She'd waited 14 years for this. She'd prepared for 14 years. She knew what to do. On February 3rd at 8 in the morning, Clayton Mercer was brought to the operating room. They transferred him to the operating table, covered him with sterile sheets. Grace connected the monitors, checked the ventilator, prepared the anesthesia drugs. The surgeon, Dr. Robert Brennan, an experienced physician of pre-retirement age, washed his hands, put on gloves, nodded to her. "Ready?" "Ready." She gave Mercer the first drug, sedative. He relaxed, began to fall asleep. Then muscle relaxant. Muscles went limp. Breathing stopped. She inserted an endotracheal tube down his throat, connected him to the ventilator. The machine began rhythmically pumping air mixture into his lungs. Numbers flashed on the monitor. Pulse 78, pressure 140/90, saturation 98%. Everything normal. The surgeon took the scalpel, made the first incision. Surgery began. Grace sat at Mercer's head, monitoring the indicators. She remembered Victor, lying in bed with dead legs. She remembered how he'd asked then, "Will I walk again?" She remembered 3 names that had burned inside her for 14 years. Her hand slowly reached toward the oxygen flow valve on the ventilator. Just a little turn. 1 rotation. Delivery would decrease imperceptibly for the instruments, but enough to start the process. "Clamp," the surgeon requested. The surgical nurse handed in the instrument. Brennan was working on the gallbladder, removing stones. Routine surgery. He'd done hundreds like it. Grace's hand froze over the valve. 1 rotation. Just 1. And in 8 minutes, Mercer would turn into a vegetable. Forever. She turned the valve. Her face didn't flinch. 14 years of waiting were over. Retribution had begun. The oxygen delivery decreased by 30%. The ventilator continued working. Mercer's lungs inflated and deflated, but there was too little oxygen in the mixture. The saturation on the monitor began slowly falling. 97%, 96%, 95%. This was still within acceptable limits. The surgeon wasn't paying attention. Grace sat motionless, counting seconds. She knew. For irreversible brain damage, 8 to 10 minutes of hypoxia were needed. But she couldn't just wait 10 minutes, otherwise it would become obvious this wasn't an accident. She needed to act correctly. After 4 minutes, she would notice the problem, begin emergency measures, but it would already be too late. "Bleeding," the surgeon said. "Sponge." Saturation dropped to 92%, then to 90%. Pulse began accelerating, 85, 90, 95. Mercer's body was trying to compensate for oxygen deficiency, heart beating faster, pumping blood quicker, but there was no oxygen. 3 minutes passed. 88% saturation. Pressure started jumping. A red light flashed on the monitor. A warning beep sounded. "What's that?" the surgeon asked without looking up. "Tachycardia." "Correcting," Grace answered calmly. She administered a drug to lower the pulse. Technically, everything correct. The beeping stopped. 4 minutes. Saturation 85%. This was already critically low. Mercer's brain was beginning to die. Neurons deprived of oxygen were initiating their self-destruction program, dying in whole sections. Irreversibly. "Saturation dropping," the surgical nurse said anxiously, looking at the monitor. Grace quickly stood, turned the oxygen valve back to full delivery. "Hypoxia, increasing the oxygen." She portrayed panic, acted quickly, professionally, administered a stimulant, checked the endotracheal tube. Everything correct, by the book. Saturation began rising. 87%, 90%, 93%, 96%. Returned to normal. Pulse stabilized. "What happened?" The surgeon looked up from the surgical field, looked at her. "Not sure. Possible equipment issue or individual reaction. Everything's stable now." Grace checked all the indicators. "You can continue." Brennan frowned, but continued. Surgery lasted another 40 minutes. Grace sat at Mercer's head, monitoring the instruments. She knew. 4 minutes of acute hypoxia, right on the edge. Possibly not enough for complete vegetative state, but enough for severe damage. We'll see. Surgery ended successfully. Gallbladder removed, stones extracted, everything sutured. Dr. Brennan removed his gloves, wiped sweat from his forehead. Went well. Wake the patient. Grace administered the anesthesia reversal agent. Under normal circumstances, Mercer should have started waking within 5 to 10 minutes. Eyelids would flutter, eyes would open. He'd start breathing independently. They could remove the endotracheal tube. But Mercer didn't wake up. After 10 minutes, Grace administered another dose of stimulant. Nothing. Mercer lay motionless, eyes closed, breathing only from the ventilator. After 20 minutes, the surgeon got worried. Why isn't he waking? I don't know. All indicators are normal, heart's working, breathing's there, but no consciousness. They called the head of the ICU. An elderly professor, medical luminary, examined Mercer, checked reflexes, shook his head. Coma. Cause unclear, possibly complication from anesthesia, possibly ischemic stroke during surgery. It happens. Transfer to ICU. They took Mercer away. Grace stayed in the operating room, filling out the protocol. She wrote everything strictly by the book. Surgery start time, drugs, dosages, complication at the 4th minute, measures taken. Everything correct, all according to medical standards. Nothing to criticize. Surgeon Brennan approached her. Dr. Hartley, what happened, in your opinion? I don't know, Dr. Brennan. I'll check the ventilator equipment. Maybe there was a malfunction, but most likely individual intolerance. He has a bad heart, age, excess weight. The brain might not have withstood the stress of surgery. Yeah, poor guy. Has a family, kids. Brennan sighed and left. Poor guy. Grace remained alone. She cleaned up the used drugs, wiped down the table, checked the equipment. Her hands were steady. She felt neither pity nor triumph. She felt cold satisfaction from a job done perfectly. Clayton Mercer spent 2 weeks in ICU. He never regained consciousness. The brain was damaged so severely that only basic functions remained. Breathing, heartbeat. No reflexes, no pain response, no light response. Vegetative state. Doctors shrugged. It happens. Rare, but it happens. Unpredictable reaction to anesthesia. His age, comorbidities. Unfortunately. Mercer's wife sobbed in the corridor. The children came every day, looked at their father connected to machines, with a tube down his throat and a catheter. He lay with open eyes but saw nothing. Living doll. Grace went into the ICU, checked his condition as the attending physician. She looked at him. The important boss turned into a helpless creature. 15 years ago, he'd beaten her brother, broken his spine. Now he lay himself, forever. She felt nothing. No joy, no satisfaction. Just noted the fact. 1 of 3 done. A month later, Mercer was transferred to a long-term care facility. There he lay in a general ward among similar vegetables. Victims of strokes, injuries, medical errors. His wife visited once a week, then once a month. The children came less and less. He lay for years, fed through a tube, bathed, turned to prevent bed sores. Living dead man. And Grace Hartley continued working at Allegheny General Hospital. Exemplary doctor. No complaints. 7 months later, a second patient was brought to Allegheny General Hospital. Dale Hutchins, 52 years old, perforated gastric ulcer. Emergency surgery required. Anesthesiologist, Grace Hartley. July 1983 was hot. Hutchins felt sharp abdominal pain in the evening after a barbecue. At first he thought he'd eaten something bad, but the pain became unbearable. He started vomiting blood. His wife called an ambulance. Diagnosis was made quickly. Perforated gastric ulcer. The ulcer had ruptured, stomach contents had entered the abdominal cavity, peritonitis was starting. Without surgery, he'd die within 24 hours. They needed to cut open the abdomen, remove the ulcer, irrigate the cavity, suture it. They brought Hutchins to surgery in the evening. The on-call surgeon examined him, scheduled emergency surgery for the morning. The on-call anesthesiologist that night was Grace Hartley. When she entered the room for the pre-op assessment, Hutchins was writhing in pain. They were giving him painkillers, but they barely helped. He was gray with pain, covered in cold sweat. "Mr. Hutchins," Grace introduced herself. "I'm Dr. Hartley, the anesthesiologist. You'll be operated on tomorrow. I need to ask a few questions." He groaned something. She methodically asked questions. He answered with difficulty. No allergies, chronic conditions, hypertension, gastritis, old ulcer for many years. No previous surgeries, never had anesthesia before. Grace wrote everything in the chart. She looked at this man, the second of 3. He too had aged, fattened, become bloated. Important shift supervisor, respected man. Now he was just a sick person afraid of dying. "Doctor," he rasped, "will I survive?" "The surgery isn't too complex. If everything goes well, you'll survive." "And if it doesn't go well?" She looked into his eyes. "Then you won't survive." He went even paler. She left the room. In the staff room, she opened his chart again, studied his medical history. Hutchins had suffered from an ulcer for many years, constantly took omeprazole but didn't follow his diet, smoked, got stressed. Typical case. The ulcer could have ruptured at any moment. And it did. Grace opened her anesthesiology reference book again. Again, the section on hypoxia. With Mercer, she'd given 4 minutes. That was enough for vegetative state, but not for complete brain death. With Hutchins, she needed to be more precise. 6 minutes. Exactly 6. That would be enough for a guaranteed result. Surgery was scheduled for 8 a.m. They brought Hutchins to the operating room, transferred him to the table. He was semi-conscious from pain and painkillers, looked at Grace with cloudy eyes. "You'll fall asleep now," she said. "You'll wake up when it's all over." She administered the sedative. Hutchins closed his eyes. Then muscle relaxant. Breathing stopped. Endotracheal tube down the throat, connection to ventilator. Monitors flashed. Pulse 95, pressure 150/100, saturation 99%. The surgeon began the operation. Cut open the abdomen, opened the abdominal cavity. It was full of bile and blood. The ulcer had ruptured through the stomach wall. "Textbook case," the surgeon muttered. He began irrigating the cavity, suctioning out contents. Grace monitored the indicators. She waited for the right moment. Surgery had been going for 20 minutes already. The surgeon was busy, concentrated. Now. Her hand reached for the oxygen flow valve, turned it 1 rotation. Delivery decreased. Saturation began falling. 98%, 96%, 94%. Pulse began rising. Grace sat motionless, counting seconds in her mind. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 92% saturation. 3 minutes, 88%. 4 minutes, 85%. Red light flashed. "Hypoxia!" the surgical nurse shouted. "I see it!" Grace turned the valve back, began emergency measures, but her hands moved slightly slower than necessary. 1 second slower. 2. 5 minutes passed. 6 minutes. Only after 6 minutes did she fully restore oxygen delivery. Saturation began rising. "What's happening?" The surgeon looked up from the surgical field. "Hypoxia again, like last time. I'll check the equipment after surgery. It's stabilized now." Grace looked at the monitors. Everything returned to normal. But it was already too late. Hutchins' brain was dead. Surgery ended in an hour. Ulcer removed, abdomen sutured, Technically, everything went successfully. The surgeon washed his hands. Wake the patient. Grace administered the anesthesia reversal agent. Hutchins didn't wake up. Another dose. Nothing. Stimulants. Nothing. After 20 minutes, it became clear. Coma. Again. Second time in 7 months. The department head came personally, examined Hutchins, checked everything, shook his head. Again. What the hell is going on? 2 cases in 6 months? He turned to Grace. Dr. Hartley, what's happening? This is your second patient who doesn't wake up after anesthesia. Grace maintained calm. I don't know, Dr. Morrison. Both times there was hypoxia during surgery. Both times I took prompt measures. But the patients were in critical condition with comorbidities. Check the equipment, all of it, immediately. I will definitely check. They checked the ventilator. No malfunctions. Everything worked perfectly. Technicians shrugged. Machine's fine. Maybe human factor? An investigation began. They assembled a committee, studied protocols of all operations, questioned all participants. Grace testified calmly, confidently. She acted strictly by protocol both times. Yes, there was hypoxia, but she reacted quickly. Perhaps the patients had individual anesthesia intolerance. It's rare, but it happens. Surgeon Brennan confirmed. Dr. Hartley acted professionally. I saw it. She did everything she could. Equipment checked, no issues. Drugs, normal. Protocols, composed correctly. The committee concluded 2 cases of anesthesia complications caused by critical patient condition and comorbidities. Dr. Hartley acted according to protocol. No fault found. But Grace was taken off surgeries for a month as a precaution. The department head told her directly, Dr. Hartley, I believe you, but 2 cases is too many. Rest, think. Maybe you should change specialties? ICU, internal medicine? I'll think about it, Dr. Morrison. Dale Hutchins lay in ICU for 3 weeks, then was also transferred to long-term care. Vegetative state like Mercer. His wife visited at first, then stopped. Divorced him a year later. Technically, he was alive, but effectively dead. 2 of 3. Grace took sick leave for a month, rested, visited her brother, read books, walked around the city. She waited for the commotion to die down. She knew. The last one would be harder. After 2 cases, they were watching her. She needed to be more careful. 1 remained. Warren Caldwell, 65 years old, retired. The oldest, most experienced, most cruel. The one who held Victor by the arms while the other 2 beat him. The one who said, "You fell down the stairs. Remember that." A year passed. Grace was returned to surgeries in August 1983. No more complications. She did dozens of anesthesia procedures. All patients woke up. Exemplary, careful, professional. The committee was satisfied. Those 2 cases really were unfortunate accidents. Grace worked calmly, methodically. She knew. Caldwell was old, sick. Sooner or later he'd end up in the hospital. She just needed to wait. She didn't wait long. October 1984. Warren Caldwell felt severe chest pains. Angina, which had tormented him in recent years, worsened. They admitted him to the cardiology ward at Allegheny General. Diagnosis: ischemic heart disease, requires coronary artery bypass surgery. Complex open-heart surgery, but without it he'd die within a year. Caldwell was afraid. He'd heard that 2 of his old buddies, Mercer and Hutchins, had fallen into comas after surgeries. Both at this same hospital. Both didn't wake up. Coincidence? He didn't believe in coincidences. When the cardiologist told him about the necessity of surgery, Caldwell asked, "And who will do the anesthesia?" "One of our anesthesiologists. We'll assign the best." "I heard you had cases. people didn't wake up after anesthesia. The cardiologist frowned. There were 2 unfortunate cases, yes, but that was exceptional. We have excellent specialists, don't worry. I want to know who will give me anesthesia in advance. We'll see from the schedule. Most likely Dr. Peterson or Dr. Hartley. Hartley? Caldwell became alert. The surname seemed familiar. What's her first name? Grace Hartley, experienced anesthesiologist, been with us for 2 years. Hartley. Caldwell lay in his room staring at the ceiling. Hartley. Victor Hartley, that kid they'd beaten up at the plant with Mercer and Hutchins. When was that? In '68. 16 years ago. And that kid had a sister. What was her name? He didn't remember, but the surname was the same. Simple coincidence? Maybe. There are thousands of Hartleys in Pittsburgh. But Mercer and Hutchins both fell into comas, both at this hospital. And now he was here. Caldwell called from the hospital payphone to his old friend Ivan, who worked in the city records office, asked him to check. Was there an anesthesiologist, Grace Hartley, in Pittsburgh, born around 1949? Did she have a brother, Victor? Ivan called back in 2 days. There is. Grace Hartley, born 1949, works at Allegheny General as an anesthesiologist. Brother Victor Hartley, born 1946, permanently disabled since 1968. Cause of disability, spinal injury sustained in workplace accident. Caldwell hung up. His hands were shaking. It was her, that kid's sister. She became a doctor. She works here, and Mercer and Hutchins both ended up with her. This wasn't coincidence. This was revenge. Caldwell called the head of cardiology, an elderly professor, told him straight. I don't want Dr. Hartley doing my surgery. Assign another anesthesiologist. Why? Dr. Hartley is one of our best specialists. I have personal reasons. Just assign someone else. The professor frowned. All right. We'll assign Dr. Peterson, but keep in mind, surgery's in a week. Peterson might be busy. If he can't, it'll have to be Dr. Hartley. Make sure he can. But fate decided otherwise. 3 days before Caldwell's surgery, Dr. Peterson was in a car accident. Not serious, just bruises, but he took 2 weeks sick leave. His only replacement was Grace Hartley. When Caldwell was informed that Dr. Hartley would be doing his surgery, he went pale. No, cancel the surgery. I'm not doing it. Mr. Caldwell, you don't understand the seriousness of the situation. Without surgery, you'll die within months. You have critical narrowing of the coronary arteries. I'll die on the operating table. What makes you think that? I know. Caldwell stared at the wall. He couldn't explain, couldn't say, 16 years ago, I and 2 buddies beat up her brother, made him disabled, and she's taking revenge on us one by one. Who would believe him? No evidence, just paranoid ravings of a sick old man. The professor sighed. It's your decision, but without surgery, fatal outcome, guaranteed. Caldwell thought for 3 days. He could refuse surgery, leave the hospital, live a few more months, maybe a year, die at home in his own bed, but he was afraid of death, afraid of pain, afraid of suffocating from a heart attack. And surgery gave him a chance, a small one, but a chance. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe it really was all coincidence. Lots of Hartleys, 2 unfortunate cases. Statistics. It happens. On the 4th day, he agreed. Do the surgery. But make sure Dr. Hartley knows. I figured it all out. I know who she is. And if I don't wake up, my wife knows everything. I wrote her a letter. She'll go to the police. The professor looked at him in surprise. What are you talking about? What letter? Tell Dr. Hartley that. The professor shrugged. All right, I'll tell her. The next day, the day before surgery, Grace entered Caldwell's room. She hadn't seen him in 16 years. He'd aged, become gaunt, pale, gray, wrinkled, with trembling hands. Dying old man. Mr. Caldwell, she introduced herself. I'm Dr. Hartley, the anesthesiologist. Tomorrow you'll be operated on. I know who you are, he interrupted. His voice was hoarse but firm. You're Victor Hartley's sister. She stopped, looked at him for several seconds, then nodded. Yes. You killed Mercer and Hutchins. They didn't die. They're alive. You turned them into vegetables. That's worse than death. My brother is also a vegetable. 16 years he's been lying in bed. You did that. You, Mercer, and Hutchins. You beat him, broke his spine, took away his life. He was 22 years old. Caldwell was silent. He remembered that day. He never forgot, just didn't think about it. And now the reckoning had come. I wrote a letter to my wife, he said. Told her everything. If I don't wake up after surgery, she'll go to the police. They'll lock you up. Grace smiled. What did you write her? That 16 years ago you and your friends beat up a young worker and now his sister is taking revenge? You confessed to a crime. Statute of limitations hasn't passed. They'll lock up all three of you first. Mercer and Hutchins posthumously, and you, while you're still alive. Caldwell went white. He hadn't thought of that. Indeed, his letter was a confession to assault. He'd buried himself. And they won't lock me up, Grace continued calmly, because there's no evidence. 2 unfortunate cases the committee checked, found no fault. You think anyone will believe that a doctor intentionally kills patients? For what purpose? Revenge for a brother who was beaten 16 years ago? It sounds like delusion. Your wife will read the letter, think you went crazy before death, and throw it away. He understood. She was right. Nothing could be proven. She'd won. What do you want? He rasped. To kill me? No. Grace sat in a chair next to the bed. I want you to lie just like my brother. For years. Conscious but unable to move. So that every day you look at the ceiling and remember what you did. Mercer and Hutchins are lying now. They don't understand anything, don't feel, don't remember, but you will remember. I'll arrange it. Caldwell closed his eyes. I won't go through with the surgery. I'll refuse. Then you'll die in 3 months in terrible agony from a heart attack. You'll suffocate, writhing on the floor. I've seen such deaths. It's painful, scary, long. Better that than becoming a vegetable. Grace stood. Decide for yourself. Surgery's tomorrow at 8 a.m. If you're on the table, I'll do my job. If you refuse, you're right. She left the room. Caldwell lay awake all night. He thought about life, about death, about that young man they'd beaten. They didn't want to cripple him, just wanted to scare him, teach him a lesson. But they got carried away. It happens. At the plant, such things happened constantly. Someone out of place, someone sticking their nose where it doesn't belong. They were put in their place, common practice. But back then, in '68, they went too far. Mercer was drunk, Hutchins was angry, and he, Caldwell, didn't stop them. He was guilty. They were all guilty. And now the reckoning. 2 were already lying as vegetables. The 3rd should join them. By morning, Caldwell decided he wouldn't go through with surgery. He'd die however he died, but wouldn't give her the chance. He called a nurse, said, "Cancel the surgery. I refuse." The professor rushed in, the department head, the cardiologist. They pleaded, explained it was suicide. Caldwell was adamant. "Fine," said the professor. "Sign the refusal of medical intervention. We can't force you." Caldwell signed. They began preparing him for discharge. 2 hours later, he had a heart attack. Sharp chest pain, shortness of breath, cold sweat. He fell from the bed, gasping. Doctors and nurses rushed into the room. Resuscitation, adrenaline, defibrillator. They revived him, but his condition was critical. One more attack, and that's it. The cardiologist told him straight, "Mr. Caldwell, the next attack will be your last. You'll die. You have 2 options, emergency surgery now or death within 24 hours. There is no third option." Caldwell lay connected to monitors, listening to the beeping of machines. He understood. No choice. The heart wouldn't hold. Either surgery or death. Maybe in surgery he had at least some chance. Maybe she'd have mercy. He agreed. Do it. They wheeled him to the operating room an hour later. Emergency surgery. Team of surgeons, cardiac surgeon, assistants, and anesthesiologist. Grace Hartley. When they brought Caldwell into the operating room, he looked at her. She stood by the equipment, calm, collected, in medical scrubs and mask. Their eyes met. He wanted to say something, beg for mercy, but she'd already approached, took a syringe. "You'll fall asleep now," she said, "and then we'll see." Injection. Cold in the vein. Consciousness floated away. The last thing he thought. Forgive me, Vic. Forgive me. Open-heart surgery lasts 4 to 6 hours. In that time, anything can be done, and no one can prove it was intentional. They connected Caldwell to a heart-lung bypass machine. His heart was stopped so they could do the bypass. The cardiac surgeon worked, installing bypass grafts, alternative pathways for blood. Complex, delicate work. Grace sat at the head, controlling anesthesia, breathing, pressure. Everything was stable. Surgery was going well. After 3 hours, the surgeon finished the main part, began closing. The most dangerous part was behind them. All that remained was to restart the heart, disconnect the bypass machine, check that everything worked. And that's when Grace made her move. When Caldwell's heart was restarted, she gave him a drug, officially cardiac stimulant, but the dose was slightly higher than normal, just a bit, on the edge of overdose. Caldwell's heart beat rapidly, pulse 110, 120, 130, too fast. Pressure spiked, 180 over 110. Monitors screamed. "Tachycardia!" the surgical nurse shouted. "I see it, correcting." Grace administered a drug to lower the pulse, but again, dose slightly higher than needed. Pulse dropped sharply. 130, 100, 70, 50, 40. Too slow. Pressure crashed. 100 over 60, then 80 over 50. "Bradycardia! Pressure dropping! Epinephrine!" Grace administered stimulant. Pulse jumped again. 50, 80, 110, 140. Caldwell's heart was bouncing between tachycardia and bradycardia. This is called arrhythmia. Dangerous condition. The heart might not withstand it, might stop. The surgeon dropped his work. "What's happening?" "Arrhythmia, trying to stabilize." Grace worked quickly, administered drugs, adjusted doses, but each time on the edge of overdose. Caldwell's heart jumped like a ball. 5 minutes of arrhythmia, that's a lot. The heart was working in extreme mode. The brain was receiving blood, but in an uneven mode, sometimes more, sometimes less. This is called ischemia, insufficient blood supply. Finally, Grace stabilized the rhythm. Pulse 80, pressure 120 over 80. Normal. Monitors quieted. "There, stable," she said. The surgeon wiped sweat. "What was that?" "Arrhythmia. The heart reacted to surgical stress, but everything's fine now." They finished the surgery, bypasses installed, heart working, everything sutured. Technically, success. Grace administered anesthesia reversal agent. Caldwell should have woken up, but he didn't wake up. 20 minutes passed. Caldwell lay unconscious, breathing only from ventilator, eyes closed, no reflexes. The department head came personally, for the third time. Again? Dr. Hartley, what the hell is going on? There was arrhythmia during surgery, lasted 5 minutes. The brain may have suffered from ischemia. Why was there arrhythmia? Cardiac response to surgery. Caldwell was old, sick heart, these things happen. 3 times in 18 months.
3 of your patients don't wake up. This can't be coincidence.
Grace looked into his eyes calmly. Dr. Morrison, in 18 months I've done 340 surgeries. Of those, 3 complications. That's less than 1%. Statistics within normal range. To hell with statistics. I'm demanding a full investigation immediately. The investigation began the next day. They assembled a committee of the region's best specialists, studied protocols of all 3 surgeries, questioned participants, checked equipment, tested drugs. Grace testified, calmly, in detail, professionally. Everything by the book. Yes, there were complications, but she acted correctly. All witnesses confirm. Surgeons confirmed. Dr. Hartley acted professionally. We saw it. She did everything possible. Equipment checked, no issues. Drugs, normal. Protocols, composed correctly. The committee worked a week. Conclusion. 3 cases of anesthesia complications caused by critical patient condition and individual intolerance. Dr. Hartley acted according to medical protocols. No violations found. But the hospital's chief medical officer called Grace to his office personally. He was a smart man, many years in medicine. He looked at her for a long time, studying her. Dr. Hartley, he said finally, the committee cleared you. Formally, you're clean. But 3 cases in 18 months? That's too many. Even if it's coincidence. I can't prove you did anything intentional, but I can't let you continue working as an anesthesiologist either. Understand? I understand. I'm transferring you to internal medicine as an internist. No surgeries. This isn't punishment, it's precaution. Do you agree? Grace nodded. I agree. And one more thing. Those 3 patients, Mercer, Hutchins, Caldwell, I knew them all. They worked together at the plant, were friends. All 3 ended up with you, and all 3 fell into comas. This might be coincidence, but if it's not coincidence, then I don't want to know the reason. Understand? Grace looked at him. She understood. He suspected. Smart man, he put 2 and 2 together, but he couldn't prove it, and didn't want to dig deeper because if he dug, worse things might surface. I understand, she said. Go. Work. And no more complications. Grace transferred to internal medicine, worked as an internist for 2 years, then resigned, left Pittsburgh, moved to a small town in Pennsylvania where nobody knew her. Warren Caldwell spent a month in ICU, then they transferred him to long-term care, to the same ward where Mercer and Hutchins lay. 3 beds in a row. 3 living corpses. But with Caldwell it turned out differently. Grace had calculated wrong. Or right, who knows. The arrhythmia damaged his brain but didn't kill it completely. Caldwell remained conscious. Partially. He couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't control his body. Complete paralysis, like Victor. But unlike Victor, he was himself. His mind worked. He understood everything, felt everything, remembered everything. He lay for years, staring at the ceiling, listening as nurses turned him to prevent bed sores, as they fed him through a tube, as they changed his catheter. He couldn't say a word, couldn't move a finger. Prisoner in his own body. Next to him lay Mercer and Hutchins, living vegetables without consciousness. They felt nothing. But he felt everything. Every day he remembered that August evening in 1968, the metal staircase, the young man who refused to withdraw his complaint, how they beat him. how he held the kid's arms while the other two broke his back. Now his back was broken, not physically, but effectively. He lay paralyzed, like that kid. Fair? Maybe. Spring 1985. Victor Hartley died in his sleep, quietly, without suffering. He was 39 years old, 17 of which he'd lived as a disabled person. Grace buried him in the city cemetery. On the headstone she wrote, "To my beloved brother, from your loving sister." The funeral was modest. A few of Victor's work colleagues, in recent years he'd translated technical documentation from home, some of them came. A few neighbors. Grace stood by the grave alone, holding a handful of earth. She didn't cry. She never cried in public. When everyone left, she stayed by the grave, sat on a bench, looked at the fresh mound. "Vic," she said quietly, "I did what I promised. All three. Mercer and Hutchins, vegetables, feel nothing. Caldwell, worse. He's conscious but paralyzed, like you were. He lies there and remembers, every day." Wind rustled the leaves. Grace sat motionless. "You asked me not to do this. You said, 'God will judge them.' Forgive me, Vic. I couldn't. I had to." She stood, placed a bouquet of white carnations on the grave. Left. That same day, she wrote her resignation letter from the hospital. A week later, she left Pittsburgh, moved to a small Pennsylvania town where nobody knew her, got a job at a local clinic as a regular internist, rented a room, worked from morning to evening, saw patients with colds, flu, gastritis. Ordinary, quiet life of an ordinary doctor. Nobody looked for her. The case with the 3 comas was closed as an unfortunate accident. The committee cleared her. The CMO transferred her to internal medicine. Then she resigned. All legal. No suspicions. And 3 men lay in a long-term care facility. Mercer died in 1988 after living in a coma for 5 years. Hutchins died in 1990 after 7 years. Their families were ruined by their care costs. Wives divorced them. Children stopped visiting. They died unwanted by anyone. Caldwell lived longest of all. He lay until 1995, 12 years paralyzed, fully conscious. 12 years staring at the ceiling, listening to hospital sounds, feeling pain from bed sores, remembering every day what he'd done and what he was paying for. His wife came the first year every week, then once a month, then once every 6 months. By the end, she didn't come at all. He died alone, and there was no one even to close his eyes. Grace learned of his death by chance, read an obituary in the newspaper. She sat in her room, looked at her brother's photograph. Victor smiled from the photo, young, 20 years old, still healthy. Before that August night. "It's over, Vic," she whispered. "All 3 are dead. Justice has been restored." But she felt no satisfaction, no joy, nothing. Emptiness inside. 17 years she'd lived for revenge, studied, worked, waited, prepared. Revenge was the meaning of her life, and now revenge was accomplished. And what next? Grace lived another 30 years, worked as an internist, then retired. Lived alone, never married, never had children. Quiet, invisible woman whom neighbors knew as Dr. Hartley, good doctor, helped many. She died in 2015 at age 66, quietly, in her sleep, from a heart attack. They buried her next to her brother, as she'd willed. On the headstone they wrote, "Grace Hartley, M.D., 1949 to 2015, dedicated her life to serving people." Nobody ever learned the truth. Nobody guessed. The case with 3 comas remained in hospital archives as an unfortunate accident, medical anomaly, rare coincidence. 3 men beat up a young worker and remained unpunished. The system protected its own, as always. Police closed the case, no trial. Guilty parties faced no punishment. But justice still prevailed. After 15 years, quietly, methodically, professionally, by the hand of a woman who waited, studied, prepared, who became a doctor not out of love for medicine but from cold calculation, who knew doctors have power over life and death, and used that power. She administered anesthesia exactly by protocol. Just the dosage was perfectly wrong. 1 second slower, 1 rotation of the valve in the wrong direction, 1 extra dose of medication. Details impossible to prove, but sufficient to destroy a life. Victor lay for 17 years. Caldwell lay for 12. Mercer, 5. Hutchins, 7. Together, 24 years in paralysis, in coma, in suffering. 24 years of reckoning. Is it fair? Everyone decides for themselves. But the fact remains. 3 men beat a person, made him disabled, and went unpunished. The system protected them. But the system didn't protect them from his sister, who spent 17 years sharpening the knife. The story ended. All participants are dead. The truth is buried with them. Only hospital archives remain, where protocols of operations gather dust with neat handwriting. Grace Hartley, M.D., anesthesiologist. Complication from anesthesia. All possible measures taken. Measures were taken. All possible. Exactly those that were needed. No more, no less. Perfectly calculated. An anesthesiologist is a god for an hour. In their hands is someone else's life. The patient sleeps, defenseless, trusting, and the doctor decides, give oxygen or not, administer the drug or not, turn the valve or leave it. Details that decide everything. Grace Hartley was an excellent anesthesiologist. All her patients woke up, except 3, and nobody will ever prove it wasn't an accident. A story about revenge, a story about justice, a story about how sometimes the system fails, but people find their own ways to restore balance. Ways quiet, invisible, perfectly legal. The doctor administering anesthesia is the most dangerous person in the operating room. Because they're invisible. Because they don't cut, don't suture, leave no traces. They just turn a valve. 1 rotation. Just 1.